Good morning, and thank you for joining Innovating to Meet New Consumer Needs, How to Use Technology to Innovate for the Future with Renee Hartmann, co-author of Next Generation Retail. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the conversation, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to basically kick off our virtual book tour, which will be going physical very soon. And there's an entire story. This is how Renee and I kept our sanity during the pandemic. Renee did an amazing kind of tour across the U.S., all the places that we all wish that we could go, and we would talk, daily at some points, weekly at others, and outlined all of these chapters. And we wrote the book that we would want to use to better understand our industry, right? That industry being retail, but really all things consumer facing. And it really is pretty unbelievable because we start, we outline, right, the state of the consumer. And then we have chapters on different areas of technology, kind of whether it's Web3 and blockchain or live streaming or retail media, these all exist right now, but we're still in the infancy in many of these, and kind of what's the opportunity and what does it take to get there? And then I always said, right, I want a roadmap, right? I want to know kind of how do I take now all of this great information and how do I put it into practice? And that's in the book also, which is why it ended up being almost 300 pages. So
we had to keep busy during the pandemic somehow,
Like I said, it kept our sanity. And then what I found kind of some of the really fun aspects was we started to talk to people whom we knew and how they were either using these technologies or trying to. And then Renee actually had the brilliant idea, like, why don't we kind of integrate into this what we learned during the pandemic and how that's affected us. And I will say, Renee, I think I started writing. I think it be like 15 or 20 pages.
You had, I think, 8 to 10 pages just straight. So I remember that.
But it was like this idea of like getting your whole, because right, many of us have probably forgotten, right? But when you're in the depths of it, right, what were you thinking about, and how did the kind of experience change us and change our desires and how we think about things? And we wove that in through the book as well. So Renee, it's been a journey. I think we're in some ways just beginning, and in some ways, right, we've put one chapter behind us. But what did you kind of along the journey, what was kind of the most fun and interesting for you?
Yeah, I think what was really fun, I think to your point is kind of, reflecting on how we've changed during the pandemic and how everybody has changed, right? And I think, as we kind of went through the process of thinking about, how my shopping behavior has changed, how my consumption behavior has changed, how my overall outlook has changed, you start to see some parallels from everybody else. And it's, I think that's what's really been shaping a lot of these trends. We talk about things like QR codes, for instance, right? I've been working with China and Asia for ages and ages. People in Asia have been using QR codes for 20 years. And every time we talk to retailers, they'd say, no, nobody's ever going to use a QR code. And then during the pandemic, you can only get your menu by QR code. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter how you're young, old, whoever, everybody uses QR code. So it's like you were forced into these things during the pandemic that had a very specific reason. It was for sanitation and not having to touch things. But today, all the restaurants still have QR codes and everybody knows how to use them now. So I think it kind of thinking back to these things that happened during the pandemic, yes, that hasn't, everyone's in person dining again and things have changed, but those behavior changes have really endured, and thinking about which ones are here to stay and which ones were just a fad.
All right, so let's get into it.
Great.
So this was kind of like where we started, right? Kind of how has the consumer changed? And, there was a lot that happened domestically, and Renee is based in Europe, and, we both have a shared heritage with kind of greater China. So really kind of all parts of the world. And we all went through some very similar experiences. And, Renee, which of these do you think was the most important to the consumer, right? Was it like the speed of being able to, right, kind of have these, if you will, responsive supply chains? What do you think it was that really what are we seeing today?
Yeah, I think, we go through, each of the chapters in the book, and one of them is quick commerce, right? And so this need for speed that consumers came up with during COVID, is now people hadn't really ever ordered groceries before. They hadn't had this idea of like, I can get something within 30 minutes, I can get it within an hour. And once people got used to that, now there's big, profound changes that can affect sustainability, that affect delivery, that affect last mile. And that all became, I just need to get food in my house and I can't go to the grocery store. And as a result, I've learned this great thing that I can get things immediately. So I think having that ability, even if it's, I used to use Target all the time during the pandemic, and within 4 hours, you order on the app and you can show up, pop your trunk, and people are putting it in your car. So it's gotten so easy. And I think people got spoiled, right? So now there's this need of, I want to keep that going. So I think speed is one with quick commerce, and I think just overall last mile solutions. And then I'd say the other big change is experiential. I think about, during the pandemic, I think obviously everyone already kind of knew how to do online shopping, but you did it even more. But now if you're going to go to a retail store, if you're going to go to the mall, you want to experience, you want to discover something, you want to have fun, you want to be with other people. So if you are going to go to the retail environment, it's more important than ever that it be experiential and not just, it's not an errand to go pick something up.
Okay, you're gonna laugh. So my first trip to the mall, kind of post, let's call it lockdown, I went actually with our analyst, Marie Driscoll. And I think Marie's very early birds. I think we got there right when it opened. And we literally closed the mall. And I still feel like I had not even scratched the surface. And it was like you were truly, not only was there the energy from being with other people, but there was this whole discovery. And if we start to think about, sustainability, which is, kind of, a key foundation of our book, right? When you buy product in a physical setting or through live streaming, right, we see a significant reduction in return rates. And the minute you got there, you're like, of course, right? I can see it. I can feel the fabric. I can try it on if I want. Not everyone was allowing you to try things on at that time, but you could at least hold it up and get a sense of it if it was going to fit. And it was some of those things that maybe you had never thought about, or you were thinking about in different ways. And I think the number one, so what we've been thinking more about is this going back to kind of the responsive supply chains. What we're hearing from a lot of our clients is around personalization. And, that can be through many different approaches, whether it's, it can be technology driven, it can be, kind of sales associate driven, but I think there's a lot that's changed there. So, as we look ahead to the next slide, right, we go through, at least we don't tackle kind of every chapter, but we go through some of them, and, kind of some of these Renee kind of referenced, but and this is just kind of a highlight. We've got, there's more, right? That's why you have to buy them. There's more.
I think there's double this number of chapters.
Yeah. So we're trying to get to a lucky number, and I think we got there. But if we think about, how all, right, in many ways, right, a year ago, retailers were not really able to monetize in a way that they can today, right? And that's through retail media, right? Monetizing their data, selling their IP in other geographies, or even in the same, we're seeing some of them. And by selling their data, it's, this idea of an anonymized, so they can actually sell it. So if you're a retailer, you can sell it to the vendor, right? So they have better insights on how to service consumers, or even on how much to order. Or you can even, there are many kind of financial services organizations who are trying to get a better understanding of the consumer. So we're talking kind of anonymized, but, it can be based on demographics or psychographics or whatnot. And to me, I think those are some of the biggest changes and how they kind of engage with, some of our chapters. I don't know, Renee, where you think the biggest kind of change has been and how that is reflected here.
I think kind of going on what you're saying with the personalization, I mean, one of the things that is really enabling that is artificial intelligence and AI, right? So we've seen, obviously, with ChatGPT and all of the things that are happening in artificial intelligence, the ability to take that data and then, intelligently use it, whether it's chatbot, whether it's, better recommendations for you, automizing, looking at better ordering, taking that information, how do we take this vast amount of data and vast amount of information and then use it to make smarter decisions? And ideally, it's coming to a way that's personalized for you and also helps the retailer optimize as well. So I think that's something that, the pace of change, even since we put the book out, has changed so much, and the development just, continues to happen.
No, absolutely. So I think we're going to dive into some of these chapters more specifically. I mean, hey, is it a fad or is it, kind of a game changer? What say you?
I think this is probably the chapter that's changed the most since we published. We published, I guess, in July 2022, and obviously cryptos, completely changed. The universe has totally changed. I think what's really been the big change, I think, from a retailer standpoint, is thinking of things like, and thinking of metaverse and just overall Web3 and how they're looking at it. I think it is not a fad, spoiler alert. I think it is here to stay. The question is how, right? So I think it's not so much about like selling limited edition NFTs and their value going up. It's really about how do you use NFTs to engage the customer, right? How do you make things that are limited, that are valuable, that are more connecting with the real world? And that's why I think, there's a graph here about how many NFTs have been done by apparel and luxury brands and streetwear brands, right? Those two industries, they know how to do scarcity. They know how to do limited edition, and they've been able to really engage with NFTs. And even if you look at a market like China, they're not really NFTs, they're digital collectibles, right? So they're really like a consumer engagement tool. The other thing I think is, all the in-game experiences and collectibles, there's so much being done. And obviously, blockchain and and supply chain, you're going to be talking about this at Shop Talk coming up in a couple of weeks. And I think that's something people don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We work closely with the CTA, which is the governing body of CS, right? And, the stats, if you will, at the end of 22 were that there are 189 million gamers in the US. And on average, they game for 24 hours a week. So if you think about
not a day.
Yeah, not a day, not yet anyway. We're not kind of hooked into the grid just yet. But and so you think about the amount of time, and right, you're talking, right, that's almost every adult. And the opportunity, right, I think that gaming became so important because we were building communities. And that is why, and I think, there's still this, like, I see the data, I hear the data, but I'm disregarding the data from a retail perspective. But I'm like, it's like, there's plain as the nose on your face where we're going. And yes, we're in the middle of some part of this kind of like crypto winter right now, which I do think is having a bit of a negative halo around this topic. But at the end of the day, right, things have changed. They are continuing to, maybe at a slower pace, and maybe with more regulation, but it has been, I think, phenomenally interesting kind of, where this has gone. So I think,
going back to kind of what we were talking about with the pandemic, I think one thing that every parent learned is how their kids were engaging on Roblox, right? My kids were on there nonstop, talking to their friends. I just met a dad the other day who was telling me about how during lockdown, he helped his kids make digital World Cup gear, and things like that. So like they were even selling things, his kids were selling things. So it's creating this whole commerce society that is really native to people. It's really natural. So I think when you kind of look at it that way, it feels not like hype because you can see how it's really happening.
I think that says it all. So, as we looked at, like, this is one of my personal favorite topics. So, anytime anyone gives me even like 2 minutes, right, I was like, I'm gonna talk really fast and tell you everything I know about like my favorite topic, because, once again, we were, kind of China based with Renee when all this started. And right, you could see very quickly the consumer change. And once again, there was this relationship with the influencer or KOL. You also found a way for, right, we saw a significant reduction, there even more so, I think, in terms of returns. But this idea that, you could ask, right, is what's the sleeve length? Is that like a periwinkle or is that a lavender? You could really get your questions answered. And I will tell you some of the things, honestly, everything I don't know about you, Renee, everything I bought on a live stream, I got it. And it was like so much better, right? I was like, it was one of those things I'm like, I bought it with knowledge, and then it would show up and I'm like, oh. And so I don't know what it was about, kind of the, what that experience did. But it's like you had confidence in your kind of consumption, and then it showed up and you're like, wow, there's so much more here than I even knew.
What I tend to buy on live streams is gifts. So I think it's that sense of discovery. Like I feel like, I found this cool thing that my sister doesn't know about, my brother doesn't know about. And so then I'll just buy it because it's like, this is cool and fun. I'm going to go give this to a friend. So I think it's kind of brought that sense of discovery and that kind of entertainment and fun that we talked about in the retail environment, where you feel that excitement really happening. And I think like when you look at China, I mean, what's so interesting to see is the amount of time people are live streaming there. On Douyin, the TikTok of China, most brands are live streaming for 12 hours a day. They have whole studios and staff set up, and it's just going all day long. So I think it is just a really vibrant way of shopping that is kind of almost a mix of the offline and online.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the opportunity here and what we've seen is different is that, when I'm in a live stream here, I mean, we work very closely on the Coresight 1010 Shopping Festival, and, you would see consumers talking to each other, right? Can I get your Instagram handle, right? Like, oh, hey, you go, congratulations. And that I think was a really, kind of interesting way. And, in some cases they're like, oh, you'd see in the notes, right? Or you're gonna be on the 4 o'clock, are you joining this one? And that I think starts to kind of build community and build relationships outside of those that we're, kind of engaging in on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes back again to kind of some of the consumer trends, right? Which is looking for community, looking for that experience. And that's where live streaming, I think, can really tap into that.
All right, I'm going to ask you this question because, we've done a lot of work in this space, and, you've seen a lot of consolidation, but do you think, and we've seen this, right, in the India market, this has been huge. In China, maybe quick is just not quick enough in the US. What do you think?
I mean, I think obviously that you always want quicker, right? In China, I think it's always been, one day, now it's 4 hours, then it's 1 hour, then it's 30 minutes. I mean, you would like instant, right? That's what they call it sometimes, instant commerce. It doesn't come. But I think that, obviously there's probably a point in time where you can't go any faster, right? And so then the question is just, how do you improve the experience? Is it more personalized? I mean, I think this picture here is a picture of my Instagram cart. And one of the reasons not Instagram, Instacart. And then every time I go there, I keep going because they know what I want. I don't have to re-put everything in again. They're giving me recommendations. 9 times out of 10, I take their recommendations because it's exactly what I buy. So I think this ability to kind of serve you something personalized, and I think the sustainability is a big piece of it. I think that, there is a lot of wasted energy, a lot of wasted time of driving to and from the stores. People can do it on bikes. They can use fuel efficient cars. They can take better routes. So I think the consumer, as they're more and more inclined to sustainability, I think there's this perception of, e-commerce as being unsustainable. And this kind of quick commerce is an in-between, which can really ally some of those concerns.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, in New York, well, first of all, it's fascinating. So, Mardosa, who runs events for us, she lives, kind of south of where I am. And we would kind of both go on a GoPuff, and we were amazed at like the localization, like basically within like, a few blocks of each other. And that, I think, hyper kind of localization or personalization, whatever you want to call it, right? That I think is what really drives this. And so what we did during the pandemic is we started to order a lot more on, there are many, kind of different platforms, but, kind of GoPuff being the one with the greatest reach in New York. And what I found, this is so interesting, because that's why I love current retail, right? Because it's ultimately you experience it, that we had almost, and we compost and all that, we had little to no waste because we were buying kind of what we needed that day. Right. And that
European style. Yeah.
that was a very different way to think about things. And then, since we were buying like our fruits and vegetables that day, right, they also tasted better. So there was a very kind of interesting change that happened. And, it was fascinating. So we have a bunch of questions. So I know we have a few more kind of topics to discuss, but let me jump in here, Renee. How have the needs of Gen Z changed pre and post COVID?
I mean, I think Gen Z has had, obviously they've had a big change in the way that I think they work and that they, are having their everyday life. Because I think about, when I was Gen Z, which sadly I'm not anymore. I mean, when I was younger in their age group, I went to the office every day, right? And I had a whole life around the office, and I had a whole kind of area around, that's who I hung out with. That's where I ate. That's where I did my dry cleaning. That's where I had my whole community. I think things have really changed with work from home. I think that's something that when you're in your 20s and 30s and you're working from home, you're creating these new communities outside of work that are, maybe it's through yoga, maybe it's through friends, maybe it's through, so I think it's kind of this idea around, and one of the things we talked about in the consumer section was really about pursuing passion. So I see, Gen Z really looking into passions, whether it's sustainability, whether it's health and wellness, whether it's, gardening. So I feel people are really kind of digging into these types of, vertical segments in a way that maybe you didn't have time to before, and maybe didn't have the engagement for, but it's really about kind of forming this community group and something that you love. And I see Gen Z doing that a lot more than I think we did, when we were their age.
It's interesting as I think about kind of, I was at PwC out of college, and what I found was the amount of mentorship I got, right?
And that is harder remote.
Yeah. And I covered many different industries. It's how I learned about very early days of the tech industry and insurance. And, one of my clients was an aluminum client, and, I did stuff in publishing, and it really, and because you were sitting on site with a client, and then you were learning from like the gurus in your own organization, right? I mean, our pace of learning was, very rapid, and you could then test everything too, right? You could hear it from your guru and then go and ask the client, and you're like, yeah, there's a little bit of, kind of, it was interesting. I hadn't really kind of gone back and thought about it that way, but I do think that that is probably very different. All right. Another question. How do you build consumer trust and loyalty after 3 years of change and flux? How is building that trust changed post-COVID?
I mean, I think it goes back to really understanding what they need, right? What are the areas where people, what are the areas that really are going to build trust? Is it authenticity? Is it, sustainability is a big one. I mean, that's a big theme that we talk about in the book. And I think that's something that has really dramatically changed in the last couple of years. I think if we look at the resale market, we're seeing especially younger consumers both my younger brother and sister, they both have new babies. They won't buy anything new. They only buy used things. It's not because they can't afford it. It's because they don't believe in it. They think it's a waste, So I think that, really thinking through what the consumer needs, what's the trust areas that you have. And I think, more than anything, consumers want transparency and honesty, right?
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely right. I mean, I do think that there's also, I recently learned this from an executive, this idea around green hushing. So this idea that you're doing everything in a sustainable way, but maybe you're not like kind of out there pounding your chest about it. And that the consumer just kind of, right, they know, right, in this modern day that, sustainability is just kind of one of the, kind of key differentiators for many in retail. And so there isn't, and, we're supposedly going to see some, kind of regulation come out in terms of reporting in April from the SEC. And it'll be very interesting because then, right, we'll have to, I guess, force it more as opposed to, right, kind of the different areas that we want to look at. But there are, right, if we're all kind of approaching this and we can measure it, and, we can then share maybe some of our stats in as a sustainability report as well, right? I think that builds up trust from the consumer perspective as opposed to, some of the, I think challenges that they're facing right now. All right, let's move on to the next one. There's more questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think the next one was really about social commerce, right? I think we've heard a lot, whether it's live streaming, whether it's group buying, influencer commerce, and even things like social payment. I was just listening to talking about a social media talk for teens. And one of the things that came up was teens feeling left out when they saw people doing Venmo transactions to each other. So I hadn't even thought of Venmo as a social platform, but it's really changed, I think, the way commerce and social have merged so close together.
And that's actually a very interesting kind of.
I never thought about that.
Well, my whole thing is like when I'm on and you can see, right, like all of people's transactions, and I'm like, you can like anonymous,
yeah.
but it's like executives I know, and I'm like, I'm not.
I don't need to know about all the beer you had last night. Yeah.
I was like, wow. I mean, I think, I think the whole kind of group buying right now, we're seeing this with some new platforms that have, kind of arrived on, in the US for us, right? So PDD or Pinduoduo, which is a Chinese kind of group buying app company, which, went public pre-pandemic. And I loved it. They always described it, and they're so right? It's like Disney meets Costco. And I remember like when I was reading their S1 and I was like, Disney meets Costco. I can't wait to see this. And so, we're now seeing it here in the US, right? And it's been fascinating, I think, of change in any area. I feel like this is where we in some ways seen the most. And I think we'll see the most, at least in like, let's call it the next 12 to 18 months, because I think all of the building blocks are there. You know, we talked about live streaming, but I do find that everyone's referring to it more now as social commerce, not just live streaming, so they can actually, you know, kind of build it out a bit, but also so that there is, you know, they can get the resources they need in an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the best, you know, I think nobody saw group buying more so than they did in China during the lockdown, during the Shanghai lockdowns, when people were having a hard time getting access to food. And so they were actually, you know, whole apartment buildings would band together and do a group order. One person would do mangoes, one person would do bananas, and they would bring like an entire truck full of, like a whole truck that would be a grocery delivery truck. And then they had to have people, all the people banded together. They unloaded them, they, you know, broke them up, repackaged them, and then delivered them, right? So you almost started like a wholesale business. And that was where entire people who didn't know each other kind of, or lightly knew each other banded together, and they created like a whole new economy from it. So, I mean, I think you can't see the power of it more than that when you're turning apartment buildings into wholesale buyers, essentially.
We all learn new skills. So,
oh yeah.
so this is actually where we're spending a lot of time right now. And, you know, there are two sides to this, I think. So can retailers monetize their data without upsetting? And it depends how you look at, I mean, it could be their vendors, right? Because we have heard a lot of feedback from certain retailers who are now charging vendors basically to look at their own data on the retailer platform, but they really need that because they need to see what else is being sold or where, you know, where there are pockets of opportunity. And then from a customer perspective, you know, this idea that you can now own your data and you can actually sell it, right? There are different technology solutions. You can sell your data to retailers. I think that's really critical. But there is, I think that it's, you know, as we did a lot of this research, Renee, right, that there's more concern from the consumer perspective as it relates to some of the technology platforms who are maybe a little bit less transparent. And then, right, they are actually monetizing the data in a way that isn't necessarily making your experience better. I don't know kind of where your thoughts are on this, because I think this is an area that's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, you know, one of the reasons why the retailer data has gotten so valuable now is I think things like cookie apocalypse, right? And being able, you know, not being able to kind of have that data. And you're right, I think consumers are wary of social media. They're wary of, you know, online data. Retail data, I don't think the consumers are as concerned about that, to be honest. It's not something that's top of mind. And I think the other thing that's so interesting, I was just at Euroshop in Dusseldorf, and one of the things they had is all these smart stores and the amount of data you can get. You can just, now there's so many ways you can see if anybody touched your product. If nobody touched your product in the last week, maybe there's something going on, or how many times people picked it up and put it down. And then what did they pick up if they put yours down? You know, so there's so much data that's being generated within the retail environment. This picture here is from Family Mart in Japan, and they actually, they built the biggest retail media network in Japan, even bigger than some of the TV stations. So when you have this, you know, ability to really reach people in a way that's providing them content they want, that's personalized. So it's, I think in that way, it can be helpful to the consumer. Like this one here, we have, you know, giving you offers of things that you want. That does, as a consumer, make you feel special and makes you feel like you're being seen. And at the same time, it's giving data to all of the vendors as well, and to the retailer. So I think it's a win-win, as long as obviously it needs to be done in a way that is respectful of people's privacy and not too intrusive and doesn't feel too much like you're selling. But there's just so much data out there to be collected and that can be beneficial to the consumers, to the retailer, and to the vendors.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a topic that becomes increasingly interesting, because I do actually think it ties into something that you brought up, which is really important, which is personalization. Oh, this is a toughie. I mean, right, as a former Wall Street analyst, I will say it is with trepidation, and, you know, I feel that in some cases, some of these could lead to, you know, we had the, you know, kind of crisis of 2008. I mean, I guess technically we just had another crisis, although driven by nothing on this page. And the challenges do consumers kind of, because we actually saw, this is what I have to tell you, this was like my aha moment on this. In December of 22, right? You never see the savings rate go up in December. And I'm like, how is the savings rate increasing in a month where consumers are spending, right? And that I thought was very interesting. And I wasn't sure if that was kind of buy now, pay later, or kind of how, you know, how that had really changed. But I was more concerned about some of this payment innovation, making it difficult for consumers, especially right if you're a young consumer, just how do they manage their spending?
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. I mean, one that speaks to me is the cross-border payments. I'm living in Portugal now, and actually this is my screen when I come up, and MB Way is the Portuguese banking system, right? So now it's to the point where if I want to buy, Birkenstocks, I can go and I can pay with my Portuguese local bank, and it'll be delivered to my house within a day. So I think it is kind of really interesting to see how easy it's gotten, even when you're in different places. If I was in China, we'd be having Alipay and WeChat Pay up there. So I think it's to be able to kind of personalize that, and then get things, fairly easily, depending on the country you're in, has been kind of a game changer where, I remember 10 years ago when I lived in China, it wasn't that easy to get things. So it's gotten so much easier to kind of, level the playing field and make it easy. And then for me, one-click checkout, I will always pick one-click checkout just because I never want to have my credit cards out. I'm lazy. I don't want to put in 8 million different, passwords. So to me, that seems like a no-brainer just because I'm sure there's a lot of other lazy consumers like me.
I actually think that, it's been fascinating to see, Amazon Pay show up on all different kinds of websites. And to me, that is, I think it's got greater penetration actually than Apple Pay from the data that we've seen. And it goes back to, there's just a simplicity, right? If I'm already there, I've already, they already have my data, et cetera. There is something that, it's actually quite brilliant. There is something to be said about, right, they're like now building like a whole payment ecosystem. And so I think that is, kind of changing the way that we all engage. And obviously they've got, kind of insight into purchases and, retailers besides their own, which, I used to do a lot of work in the credit card business. And I mean, it was fascinating to be able to understand, right? And it was at, kind of anonymized level, but, seeing consumer habits change pretty rapidly and seeing that kind of across like a whole host. So I know we're kind of bumping into the half hour, Renee, but, this is probably the, one of the biggest questions that, and I think we're early here and late in some ways, right? In some ways, everything, right? All these new technology solutions, right? AI is the foundation. And it used to be, right? Like retailers are going to have like an AI strategy. There's no AI strategy now, but, we're hearing, kind of whether it's, ChatGPT or any of these other kind of, generative AI, or even one of our clients, just Persado, right? Which helps to kind of, if you will, tailor your e-commerce journey so that it feels, well, it is very tailored to you, right? It's generative. And, they learn as you're shopping. Where do you think we are with this, and kind of how far do we go?
I mean, it feels like we're still at the very, very beginning, honestly. I think even, talking to retailers all the time, I think they're always looking at, merchandising, inventory management, planning, how do you get rid of out of stocks? How do you time the products? So I think there's still so much more to do with this. So I feel like we're really at the early stages, just even honestly, just beginning to understand what's possible.
Yeah, I think Microsoft recently announced that they were kind of bringing, next gen AI to the workplace through something called like Microsoft's 365 Copilot. And that I think is, kind of really very interesting. And, as we're also seeing, some of these, I think just the way that we change and how we kind of, do things differently. There's a solution called Adept. And Renee, I don't know if I've talked to you about this. So literally you can be there, we do a call. And you can be like, whatever your platform of choice, can you log the call for me? Can you put these notes in? Can you add this to my calendar? And you're like, this is a game changer.
That is nice. Yeah.
And so, right, because then it goes back to where technology is actually, right, kind of giving you more time back. So as opposed to like, 40 clicks or whatever it might be, right, you're just having, right, you're kind of engaging, and it's, kind of taking you to where you're having to actually in some ways make less decisions. And so, right, you don't have decision fatigue, or you can save that for, I think, things that, are really game changers, as opposed to, okay, what date am I going to follow up with this person? And that I think is really quite interesting. So there's a question in the chat that I think I wanted to save till the end that we can probably tie into this. So this is from Sage. Tell us about the specific shopping personalities that are developed by 15 to 18-year-olds via YouTube, Fortnite, Discord, and how they will manifest in the next 10 years. I watch these kids closely, and I'm flummoxed about how they are going to influence retail. Is it even possible for retail to sell for this group?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think some of this, I think the point of gamification is something that I think, you know, we were talking about Roblox earlier. I think that is something that, you know, that I think everybody's interested in, but I think the ability, you know, like Domino's is a perfect example here, I think, of, you know, going after kind of that young consumer and finding ways to make it fun and engaging. So I think for the young consumers, you know, a lot of attention's being paid to them having a short attention span. I'm not totally sure that's true. I think sometimes that gets overblown, but I do think they just, you know, are approaching brands in different ways. They have different types of, you know, I think decision-making factors and things like making it fun and, you know, having, I mean, there was our son was just telling us about, there's a YouTuber who just launched, or I guess it was maybe a year ago, a new type of Gatorade. I can't remember the name of it, like Powerade or something. And it's sold out everywhere. He's got his friends telling him, if you go to the US, you know, make sure to bring me back a bottle of it. It's gotten crazy. And it's all because of, you know, one YouTuber. So I think there's gonna be new brands that are gonna come out that I think, you know, unless you're on YouTube, you're not even gonna understand what these brands are.
Yeah, and I think that this idea, right? I mean, early in our careers, you would identify with the brand, right? Like, I'm a Sears shopper, I have a Sears credit card. And I think now, right, we're more closely identifying in some ways, right? There's a whole discovery, right? And I found this brand and I've gotten to know the founder, right? I'm in some kind of subscription. She sends me, you know, kind of little notes and something else. And I think this whole idea, right? You engage in a way that you want to, but you feel it goes, I mean, I have to say, I think it goes back to personalization, right?
Mhm.
Because it feels like you've discovered it. And then the way that they engage with you is very personalized. And I think that is, you know, we're hearing that word from many retailers. I think it means many different things, which is fine, because I think the consumer really just wants to feel that the experience is unique. And that's how they'll engage with you. And they will definitely spend more time on your site. They'll definitely spend more money. They will get your credit card and your loyalty program. And I think that, you know, the sky's
And
the
that
limit.
goes back to trust that we talked about earlier too. Same thing, right? Who do they trust and who do they want to kind of, you know, devote their time and effort to? And I think they've got a little bit of a different way. It's not a, you know, a blanket decision.
So this I will say, right, we started off trying to figure out how to explain what had really changed. So, right, you know, I was like, okay, there's 3 new things that we're seeing people sell, right? Data, you know, kind of digital collectibles and retail media. So, right. And I'm like, I'm long retail all day because of this. Right. There's a whole new, and, you know, that's why I've like been very, you know, kind of, I love the word flummoxed, not flummoxed this year, because I'm like, you know what? There's all this, oh, are we going to a recession? No, we're not going to a recession, right? Because you have a healthy consumer. We're seeing consumption, I think, at stronger levels, and we're seeing, you know, obviously, you know, kind of fairly strong job growth. And, you know, certainly maybe it's in different sectors than we expected, but, you know, no, I don't think that's happening. Secondly, we have, you know, kind of new things that we're selling, and that, in addition to how we sell them, will be a game changer. And then, you know, Renee, I don't know if you want to talk about how we're delivering them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to some of the consumer needs, right? And we've kind of talked about this, I think, throughout, is personalized, it's sustainable, and it's experiential. And no matter what you're selling and how you're selling it, these are the ways that the consumer wants it delivered. And these are kind of the new criteria by which they're really judging all of their purchases. So I think no matter what kind of you know, campaign you have, what kind of new type of you know, product that you're selling, it has to be considered within these, as with the filter of these 3 areas.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think that, you know, our message for today is, you know, we've kind of been down this, you know, kind of very detailed journey of, you know, many topics that are important to, I'd say, consumer facing businesses. It's not just retail. And, you know, Renee and I have, you know, we spent a lot of time, we combined a lot of, you know, gray matter to really come up with something we thought was, you know, practical, but also very insightful. And so some of the ways that, you know, we're trying to kind of help, you know, everyone put this into practice is, you know, I mean, hey, first of all, get on the phone with us. We're always here to help. Our contact information is on the last slide. And, you know, we're putting in place kind of these, you know, if you will, communities around, you know, these kind of mastermind groups, you know, coming together to solve some problems and, you know, really doing it in a very methodical way. I know you want to talk about some of the other things on the slide, Renee?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've been trying to do is really work with companies to help them dive into their sector, right? So one of the things about next generation retail is we cover a lot of topics. We have, I think, 12 different topics that we talk about. So we're working with companies to help them dig into specific ones and then also look across the business to see how they can kind of make sure that they're not missing anything and that they're looking, immediately, and then also 3 to 5 years and even 10 years in advance of, what's next. So I think, we're going to be doing online training. So if you want to learn more about it, you can take your own training. Companies can book host a workshop, or we can do something where it's really kind of bringing it to life within your organization. And then I think the last thing is, the last chapter in the book, we have an entire chapter about how do you make your own roadmap, and we go, kind of topic by topic with, some thought starters, ways to approach it, frameworks. So definitely, read the book for sure, because we do get into a lot of this in the book. But the nice thing about next generation retail, I think, is that it's always changing. There's always something new. So that's why we want to kind of keep it alive and keep adapting to the new developments that are coming in, and then helping brands to kind of and companies to kind of make it their oon.
Yeah, and I think this is, especially traveling the world, right? You see so many different ways, right? You gave the Family Mart example of how, kind of much of this being put into practice. So there's also an opportunity for us to kind of do a little bit of cross-pollination and
Absolutely.
right, kind of learn from each other. But I think the idea is to have, kind of step away with very specific, kind of areas of opportunity to approach. We talked to many of the startups around the globe. I was actually participating in it was virtual, but virtual with the Retail Innovation Club of Israel yesterday. And it was amazing right there, the number of new startups, even in the past 6 months, who are solving many of these problems. But, happy to kind of connect with startups, and, kind of Renee and I are, as you can tell, very passionate about this topic. And so, we love the opportunity to spend more time with you. And so I think we've got a QR code in terms of how you can, kind of buy the book. It's being sold on all of the, kind of major publishers, and we want to thank everyone for all of their support. It's really been pretty amazing.
Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to being together at Shop Talk in a couple of weeks in Las Vegas, and continuing to go on the road and talk about next generation retail. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Renee. This has been so fun. I can't wait to do it again. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.